Welcome back, everybody. This is our next episode here on the Thrive in Wabash County podcast. This is an episode that I've been extremely excited about, from the opportunity to talk to State Senator Andy Zay, who is an incredible public servant that will get into all of his service and what he does for the 17th Senate District, for Wabash County, for the state of Indiana. And I'm excited to talk about that, but more so than anything, working through kind of at first that business relationship, become a close friend. So I'm excited for the conversation today. Andy Zay, State Senator, welcome to the Thrive in Wabash County podcast.
Well, great to be with you, and I've been anxiously awaiting this moment and just to sit down with you and have this kind of professional chat to dig back into our personal history, the history of the district, the history of our state, where we've been, where we are, and where we're heading. So I'm very excited to have a conversation with you today.
No, thank you very much. We know you're extremely busy in all the different hats you wear, both your family, professionally, and business, and politics. And we're going to talk about all of those things today.
Awesome.
But appreciate your time more than anything also, because we know you're extremely, extremely busy. First and foremost, maybe for the listener that I find it probably hard to believe that hasn't met you or may not know a lot just because of how you lead our community, but a little bit about you personally and your background.
Well, and as you well know, my personal life, my family life is what really drives Andy Zay, drives my passion. And today we sit here and talk after, again, being a road warrior and just coming back from celebrating a big win and my son last night playing football. So our youngest is a football player at the University of Toledo. Just couldn't be more proud of the man and the football player he's become, and getting to watch him grow at the collegiate ranks in the Division I program. And certainly you relate to that with your experience in coming here to Wabash County. And then also excited to celebrate the graduation of my second daughter, Meredith, who will be wrapping up her Ball State degree here in about 4 weeks. And all right now being a full-time student and in Dean's List, accomplishing great academically and professionally. So just a well-rounded young woman, and looking forward to, see what happens when we break those chains of academia and see what happens when she jumps full tilt into the real world, which she's, like I say, is well engaged there. And then my middle son, Reese, is proudly married to a Purdue basketball player. Had a tough night last night, ironically, but, just exciting that she can come back into a basketball program and live life with no regrets, and watching him stand behind her and support her as he's working full time. And they've been now proudly married for about a year. So, getting through the young years of marriage. And then our two oldest, who've, just blessed us with grandchildren, which is just a phenomenal experience, and having them close in here in the area. So real excited about that. So 5 kids, raising them has been a huge part of our life the last 20, 30 years. And now moving on to the second phase with grandchildren, and, being mentors to them and as they work through their professional existence. And also adjusting and adapting a little bit in marriage is why my wife, after 40 years in community banking, has now stepped into retirement. So kind of empty nesters. I mean, Meredith lives with us, which, 23-year-old, there's not much parenting going on there. It's just a lot of consultation and mentoring. But yeah, so it's, freed us up to do some things we haven't been able to do for many years. And she's taken on a lot of fitness challenges, grandma challenges, and other things that have been fun for her and fun to watch her grow and be around.
And lots of travel.
Yeah. Isaac kind of put us into different situations where we've covered certainly the Midwest, had an exciting trip out to the state of Washington not too long ago, and then short day trips and what have you. But yeah, so it's, we're pivoting. Talking a lot about cleaning out a house, how you purge all the stuff you've collected over raising kids for 25, 30 years, and, burying parents and the accumulation of their goods, which some of that's come into our house, and how we're going to do all that. But nonetheless, trying to build a healthy retirement, last phase of life, if you will.
For those that haven't had the opportunity to meet your wife, Cindy Zay, yet, I think it's a testament to who she is as a leader and a person. Obviously, we'll spend a lot of time today talking about your background and the work that you get to do. But Cindy, 40 years in banking and still going strong, raising a family to now grandkids, is a testament just to her, and so supporting you all these years, and the work that you get to do, I think, speaks a lot about her.
Well, marriage is marriage. Everybody knows that. I mean, there's tremendous challenges within marriage, but as you look back on her, on our relationship now spanning over 30 years, there's highs and lows and all the challenges that come with that. And the mix of 5 children in there is certainly, a tremendous challenge. I mean, there were many times over the last 30 years where there were more teenagers in the house than there were parents, and those were pretty daunting times because, teenagers aren't always the most warm and fuzzy and appreciative people in our lives. But nonetheless, we've persevered through that, and I'm very proud of, kind of the backside now, getting them into adulthood and seeing how they're becoming young adults and productive parts of our society. And now, of course, being grandparents is wonderful to watch the older ones raise their kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure see some of you and how you parented showing up in that has to be a really, really exciting and really proud moment.
They got their own game plan. It's not how Mom and I did it, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, Senator, while you do not live in Wabash County, you have been an endless champion in my time here and your time since you've moved into the state Senate and represented Wabash County for what we have in this community. But you live in Huntington County, a next door community. Talk a little bit about, though, are you from Huntington County? What's your background? How did you get to Huntington County, or if you weren't raised there, but tell us a little bit about that.
Well, let's step back a little bit there and just Zay, the Zay name. When did the Zay name arrive in Huntington County? And my grandfather worked in finance for General Motors back in the 40s and 50s. And that involved working with dealerships, setting up finance companies or financial plans for people to buy cars and that kind of thing. So in about 1953, he had the opportunity to buy a Ford dealership. And he seized that moment, and that was available in Huntington, Indiana. So he began a Ford franchise in the car business back in 1953. My father at the time was working for Procter & Gamble. Him and my mom were recently married out of Butler University. I think at that time maybe had my two oldest sisters. And then he joined his father about 5 or 6 years after he purchased the franchise and joined him in Huntington. So here we are in the 50s. They're chugging along, running a new car franchise, and that's back when anybody could afford a new car. And of course, coming out of the war, it was a pretty vibrant economy with all the veterans and soldiers and sailors coming back and coming into the workforce throughout really the country, but certainly throughout the Midwest. And small towns were vibrant. I mean, you think back to the days you've certainly thrown yourself into the history of Wabash, and it's no different in Huntington. The downtowns were thriving with the diners, the clothing shops, the shoe shops, and everything that, certainly came of that era. And so, they successfully ran the business, built a new building, and expanded the franchise and the offerings up through 1980. And, as we've lived through a little bit of the last few years, interest rates ran up to almost 20%. Half of the new car franchises in the country were failing or have failed. And so they had somebody, and my grandfather actually had outlived 2 wives. He was on his 3rd wife, but was commuting up from Indianapolis, kind of demanding that executive salary. And yet my dad and mom were basically running the whole business. And so it was an opportunity to kind of formally retire him out of the business at about 80 years old, cut that 2-hour commute, which was obviously a very big deal back then and for an elderly man. And they had started a leasing company before that was kind of a vogue thing that it is now, where we lease a lot of people lease vehicles for corporate and other reasons. And so they kind of ran the leasing company out of a storefront for a while, maintained ownership of the property, and ended up getting that. And so from that point forward, they had an independent auto dealer. They sold and continued the lease. And I was the 6th of 7 kids, so I went down to IU, graduated, came out, and again, a little bit of a challenging, what are you going to do, work environment. And it took me about 6-8 months after IU to settle down. And all of a sudden, as things happened, I had 3 kind of job offers at that one time. But the thing that drew me home was the opportunity to be an entrepreneur and to, wasn't super excited, to be quite candid, to, work under my parents and learn that from them. But there was a pretty good success story there that it took me some time. It took me some appreciation to understand. And with that, that was my clearest path to being an entrepreneur, to kind of serve with my parents and then eventually take that business over, learn that trade and carry it forward. And really that's what happened. So when I came back, we started renting cars. We were an independent dealer, sold, lease, and rent. And that's something that Cindy and I took ownership of in 1996 now. So we're almost 30 years in ourselves and as the owners, and it served our family, served us well, and here we are today. And we're a shadow of what we once were, even through our ownership. And politics, I would say, has gotten in the way of that a little bit, which and I don't say in the way necessarily in a bad sense, but just that I've thrown a lot more effort and a little more effort into the political and constituent service, maybe into the business service. And, it's very typical when we always speak about my business colleagues that are in the Senate. And, we talk about not that our businesses prosper, but what it costs for us in the realm of public service. And yeah, small town Indiana, Huntington is certainly in our blood. It's what I know. It's what I live. As a young man, and going through high school, and you hear this story over and over and over again. You hear it in Wabash, you hear it in Marion, areas that I represent, hear it from other people. You're going to graduate high school and you're out of here. I mean, you're going You're going to Paris, you're going to New York, you're going to LA, you're going somewhere, but you're not going to stay home. But, at the end of the day, and in a reflective time that, like we're in now, having, finished raising our kids and that kind of thing, I wouldn't have done it any differently. What a great place to raise a family. What a great place to be a business owner. The connections to other business folks and the camaraderie, the opportunity to be involved in your community, the opportunity to serve your community, and the opportunity to reach out when you need help, from the smallest of things to some bigger things. It's just been a true blessing. And I think the things that I mentioned are really what have helped Cindy and I sustain 30 years of marriage and raising 5 children.
And I know you both have been extremely committed to your faith right through that, and your marriage, you're raising your kids, and that bleeds through in conversations with you and when you're around your family. But the level of sacrifice is something you touched on there that I think anything in public service comes with that sacrifice, and in leadership comes with that sacrifice. But I appreciate your vulnerability in that and being willing to share some of that.
Well, faith is, kind of a tricky thing, and we've made it tricky politically. We've made it tricky through society, and some of the themes, some of the tenor, some of the rebellious, some of the protesting, certainly through the political realm. And, there's times even where I don't necessarily like to lead with that and who I am. But I think of 2 or 3 things when I speak about faith. One is, I think the public in general, particularly here in the Midwest, particularly in the district that I represent in rural Indiana, they want faith-filled leaders. They want people that have a spiritual relationship, that bring that into play with some of their views of policy and how they're going to vote and what they're going to stand for. And, sometimes those paths cross very fluidly, and sometimes, they don't. But I think that's a tremendous challenge. And like I said, when you're raising teenagers, sometimes you're not the smartest person in the house, and they'll remind that of you constantly. So it's really picking yourself up from, by your bootstraps, and, committing and recommitting yourself to your marriage, and being a husband and being a father. And what I always have shared with my children is, be sure and build your relationship with God. Be sure and, reach out in your relationship with Jesus. Leave yourself vulnerable. Tell him your problems. Thank him for the blessings that you have, because the time that you really need him, you don't want that to be an introductory moment. Hey, hello, it's me. And think of it as a phone call. Think of it as a relationship. Going, who? No, know that you know how to pray. Know that you know how to be thankful spiritually. Know that you have a higher being that you can draw on when life's just hitting you in the face. Whether it's with a personal relationship in your family, whether it's a business relationship, whether it's a political relationship, whatever, because we know all those things are going to come. Grief's going to come through friends that die, through family that die, or go through, horrific medical situations or trauma. And, you need to have the strength. You want to have that where you can be reflective and know how to build on and through that. And that's just been a sustaining thing for my wife and I, and both in, working through our lives professionally, working through our opportunities that we've taken on, and most certainly through raising our family.
I appreciate you sharing that. Extremely powerful. But our pastor here where I go to church at Grace Fellowship often compares it to, it's no different than anything else we do in life. If you don't practice it or you don't pour into it, how can you expect it to be? God will always be there, right? But how can you expect to develop your relationship with him if you're not pouring into it like anything else?
No, well, and you're exactly right. I mean, you've worked through things professionally, both in what you've done since you've gone through high school, through now college, and what you've done here professionally. And the perspective, the energy you're putting into things at a younger life like you, as I watch also my kids, is certainly one thing. But those relationships and your relationship with God is really the same thing. You've got to be introductory, you've got to be mature, and then you've got to be reflective. And all those things are the parables, they're the gospel readings, they're the greatest stories ever told come through the Bible. And they're lessons that, we go to conferences, we go to hear speakers all the time, and sometimes we forget what's right in front of us. And that's our pastors, our preachers, and those that are living and working in a field of faith that say, hey, don't forget what's important to you. And that's really, just what you've said. That's a great point.
Yeah. Public service. Mm-hmm. So you did not become a state senator overnight, nor is that an easy thing. So for our listeners that may not know your background in public service, how did you get to where you're at today serving in the state Senate?
Well, it's a great question. And again, being a little bit reflective there, I never grew up saying that I wanted to be a senator. I wanted to be a township board member. I never wanted to serve at a library board. which are all things that I've done in my past. But what was synonymous with the Zay family was the Quayle family. And of course, we know the history with Dan Quayle and him having served at so many levels, both as a congressman, the senator, and then eventually vice president of the United States. And what I mean by that is the Quayle family were our neighbors growing up. And so Jim and Corinne Quayle, Dan's parents, were literally right across we lived in a rural addition. They were right across the drive. And before that, they were down the street when they lived in the city of Huntington. So there was a bit of camaraderie. And of course, the Quayle family was very well known in Huntington because the paper was the driver of information back through that era. And Jim was the editor. And my father used to tell stories about going down and sitting with Jim as he would edit the paper with a pen and just go, or pencil, and just go through the paper and circle mistakes that his editors and different reporters had made. And, that was kind of the way they worked. But, to a certain degree, Dan, of course, was who he was as a political servant. But, I think the respect and the camaraderie that my parents really had for Jim and Corinne, his parents, was kind of special. And to that extent, we followed politics as a family. The Sunday dinner was always a big deal at our house growing up, and inevitably that's where we would speak of a lot of national politics. The review of Walter Cronkite, if you will, of the week, and the 3 or 4 papers that my parents consistently read, and that kind of formed the foundations of public service, of forming an opinion on public policy and those sorts of things. So as you grew up and really the advent of paper, even radio, we're doing a different version of radio today in a podcast, but, those have changed. And so as I began to grow up in the business, it's like, how do you market your business? And so for me, and with the children, what it really became was engaging myself and involving myself in the community. And the extent of that, a lot of it was through youth sports and coaching teams, organizing leagues, volunteering at the YMCA, raising funds for these different programs and those kinds of things. But it also brought you on the cusp of supporting a buddy that was running for city or county council, supporting a mayor and working for them and helping promote their cause. And so through that process, bumped into what is now Senator Jim Banks and worked with him, supported him in his run for the very seat that I hold, state senator. And when he moved up to Congress, then you kind of go through the series of questions. Who do I want to represent me as state senator? And, I wanted somebody with a family person. I wanted somebody with a business background. And I wanted somebody that really understands community and rural community. And as my wife Cindy and I walked through that, I kind of became the answer to those questions. So we began a process preparing for a caucus, which actually will be 10 years here in 2-3 weeks, December 6th, my daughter's birthday. And that's when I was elected at caucus. And, this winter I'll be serving my 10th session.
So we have some younger listeners that listen to the Thrive in Wabash County podcast, or adults in the community that may be less connected. But for example, Miss Schuler's art class in Manchester School District that may be listening to this episode right now, what is a state senator? What is the Indiana General Assembly? What responsibilities do you hold, at least at a high level, as we get into that work?
Well, let's get to the specific definition. And you're really talking about what is government. And government at 3 levels, you're looking at the executive, legislative, and judicial branch. So at the federal level, you have the U.S. Supreme Court. You have the President of the United States, which is Donald Trump. Everybody can identify with that person. And then you have the Senate, which in Indiana is Todd Young and Jim Banks. And you have the House of Representatives, or what we kind of commonly refer to as Congress, which here would be Rudy Yoakum, would be Congressman Marlon Stutzman and Congresswoman Victoria Spartz that represent my district with Huntington, Wabash, and Grant. And there's 9 of them, and that's proportioned based on population. And then at the state level, you have, the similar structure. So at the state level, you have the executive branch, which is represented by Governor Mike Braun now, formerly Governor Holcomb, Pence, back to Mitch Daniels and way back. And then you have the legislative branch, which is the state Senate, which is where I serve with 50 of my colleagues representing approximately 130,000 people. And then you have the House, which is represented locally by Larissa Sweet. And Craig Snow has a township, I think, in the northern part of the county. And so they represent about half that. And there's 100 representatives in the state of Indiana, or about 65 to 70,000 people. And
per district.
Yeah, per
each
district.
Of you. Yep.
And so there's 100 in the state and 50 senators. And then you have the state Supreme Court, which is represented. And of course, here in Wabash, we have one of Wabash's proud former judges, Chris Goff, that serves on that Supreme Court bench.
Yeah. Thank you. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
day to day in the legislative branch in Indiana as a state senator, what does that look like? And different states vary, right? So across the country, you have full-time legislatures, part-time legislatures, hybrid of both. What does it look like here in Indiana? And then for you, while you're in session, what does that look like?
Great question. And what's, kind of commonly maybe misunderstood both ways. And Indiana is a part-time legislature. And what that formally means is we meet for a limited time every year. In a budget year, we meet approximately 4 months, beginning the first week of January into April. And that budget year is where we get into what are tax revenue estimates coming into the state and how we're going to apportion and distribute those out through the agencies throughout the state and the different programs that the state oversees. So that takes a little more time, a few more committee hearings, a lot more floor work, et cetera. And that's, again, that's about 4 months. And we do a biennial budget, which means that's a 2-year budget. So we go every 2 years. The in-between year, which is what we're coming into here in early 2026, well, I guess late 2025 this year, but is what is kind of discussed as technical correction. So it's typically a little bit shorter, 2 months, 3 months, but we'll go in first week of January, typically till early mid-March. And any legislation in that period generally doesn't deal with any fiscal matters or very small fiscal matters like under $100,000. And so you might be creating policy for education policy and how you're working with cities, towns, counties throughout the state. And so, very limited. But so the beautiful thing of that is, I would say, is that you have citizen legislators, as was really designed by the grand architects of the United States of America, that we would be part-time legislators. We would work and live in our communities. We would pray with our fellow citizens and eat at diners and mix it up at socials and different things, and then take those experiences to go legislate for the people of our state and really of the country. It was the design and the founding of the United States. And so by true blue model, that's how it works. And that's really how it works in Indiana. A lot of our folks, almost all of our folks some are retired, but if you're not retired, many have jobs or experiences back home that they're working in between those sessions. The reality, though, is quite different. And, I can attest for Andy Zay on this and speak for myself. It is a lot more than just that part-time job in the time we're in Indianapolis. There are meetings, there are discussions about big ideas, big topics, sometimes discussions about small ideas and small topics, and where the state and some of the bureaucracies are working for or working against the people. And these ideas of what policies we need to frame, what policies we need to change take many months to prepare, and then maybe many years to even pass. So it's quite a challenge. And then the other side of that is there's always advocacy groups and business owners and the local elected officials and different folks that are constantly inviting us to get together, to talk about issues, to keep the doors of communication open, know that they're available if I'm working on something that might touch their area. And that really becomes, I would say, pronounced in a time like now, October, November, December, as we head into session. And, it's difficult for a guy like me because I'm kind of a yes guy. So I say yes to a lot of those meetings. So inevitably on any given day, I may have 4 to 5 meetings with different groups ranging from energy to education to local government and everything in between. So you're always going and visiting nursing homes and seeing what, where government, touches their area, meeting with hospitals and how Medicaid's going to work for them and doctors and different groups. So you're all the time, educating. And I always say somewhat facetiously as a joke, the day I was elected, I became an expert in everything. And clearly you're not. And so that's where these meetings become critically important because, I never understood when kind of the state and local education entities and chambers and different groups and certainly higher ed and maybe K through 12 space, we talked about creating lifelong learners, right? And, you can go get your degree from your high school and get a degree from Manchester University or anywhere. And then, okay, I'm done learning and now I just want to go work. Well, that's not the case. And it's certainly not the case in today's world. And that's very pronounced in the political arena, I would say, because, you take a topic as complex or simple, depending on how you look at it, as AI. It really wasn't a discussion just 3 years ago. So now we're talking about everything in AI, the power, the generation to have it, the capacity and have it available, the need to regulate and be careful with the dark side of AI, and certainly the promise and the opportunity that will create. And I just use that as one example because you see that in so many arenas and government work. But all that to say, there's an awful lot to learn. There's an awful lot to experience. There's an awful lot to, be a part of so that you can make educated decisions. Because at the end of the day, as a legislator, as policies come forward to the floor, you have two choices, red or green. And so you want to make as informed a decision as possible. And when the policy comes down where the rubber hits the road, if you will, you want to I try and do what I call a trifecta, and that's what I know. And that's who I might know in the industry that can give me their best advice. And then what advocacy groups or lobbyists will also inform you of. So the confluence of those three things, basically in my own mind, who gets two of those three votes of that triangle is what drives my decision either to go red or green on a specific policy. And many times it's not very clear cut. But, that's what it looks like. And then logistically, formally, what it looks like. And, that's changing a little bit as I described our personal life and that. But, formerly it was kind of Monday morning, we would get the kids off to school. I'd get Cindy off to work. I would pack up and go to Indianapolis. And so then I go to Indianapolis and I have just a beautiful situation down there. My oldest sister lives down there as an empty nester. They have a nice home and have raised all their kids. So it's been an opportunity for my sister Mary Beth and I to kind of reconnect, and they've been great hosts for me during sessions. So I kind of get out of the melee of downtown, and we've had some, she's just been a great support system, her and her husband, he's now retired. And, it's been comforting to get out of still do the evenings and still learn some stuff and have those connections and networking, but also to have a bed to sleep in and a home and that, because not a lot of my colleagues, aside those local ones that go home every night. But, being up here, it's just far enough away from Indy that, so I would go down there Monday to Thursday and come home on Thursdays typically. Sneak home occasionally during the week if there was an event. But, so you're down there Monday to Thursday most times. And if you do come home, it's getting home late because it's a 2-hour drive and going down early, usually next morning for committee work or what have you. So it's a very busy lifestyle, very crazy lifestyle, but very rewarding. And all that's the structure of how government works. But by far the most rewarding is just the constituent service and helping people that are trying to work their way through government policy.
Before we get into a little bit of that, some of your specific issues, some of the hard topics that people may read about right now, I want to hit pause for a second and just, if you're a young person or a resident in Wabash County that's listening to this right now, put yourself back in the shoes of being a young person with the experience you've had now. Why for the future, their future specifically, or for our rural community being here in Wabash County, why should they listen? Why should they lean forward and listen and pay attention to the next part of this podcast and the work that you do and the issues that you're working on? Why does it matter? Why does local government matter? There's this theme that's out there right now, right, with young people that are being raised, and for whatever reason that may be, that may not appreciate or recognize the importance of the work, right? The work that you're doing, the work that all of us, and how it all folds together for the future of our community here in rural Indiana. Talk about why this next segment is important.
Well, I'm very glad you asked that question, and it's certainly maybe more pertinent now than it ever has been. And I always contend the work that I do politically is nothing about me. It is all about my children, and it is about the next generation, because we want to set the table. We want to create the opportunity. So for folks your age and even younger coming into the workplace, coming out of high school, coming out of college, coming out of trade schools, whatever they are, or even entering the workforce, entering family life, that they have the opportunities to be successful, to fully embrace the American dream, to buy a home, to live and thrive in what you and I have spent a lot of time in right here in rural Indiana, in Wabash, in Huntington, in Grant County, down in Gas City, Jonesboro, everybody that I represent, as well as every Hoosier. I mean, we just want that success, that opportunity to be available to everybody. And for those that we train, that we invest in, all these education streams, K through 12 and our higher ed, all across the state, stay home. We want you here. We have jobs for you here. This is a great place to live. And I mean, I embody that. Cindy and I embody that fully. And we have friends that do. And some don't see it. Some are so drawn to Chicago, they got to have big buildings and the life. And even, I contend the busyness of Indy and Fort Wayne. I drive my John Deere to work sometimes in the summer, and it's just it's a freeing, it's a fresh feeling to be able to have, that kind of opportunity. But why is it important to the next generation? And, we've obviously, through my experience and my family campaigning for me some, it's a part of our dinner table. It's a part of our holiday conversations to talk both about what public service means and what different policies that might impact them or create or inhibit some of this opportunity. So personally, it's always that. But let's talk a little bit more globally. We had a huge tragedy in our country just, about 2 months ago now with Charlie Kirk being shot. I had a fundraiser here in Wabash just a week ago and brought in a young man named Brian Hollahand. I know those are polarizing figures to some. They don't agree with the ideology. They don't agree maybe with a few things they say or even a lot of what they say, and that's fine. But what I really respect about Charlie Kirk and his efforts across the country is he put himself right in the middle of everything. And then he asked those that disagree with him most to come to the front of the line and say, let's have this conversation. And the thing that's maybe most important about that is that's how we operate in the Indiana Senate. I got an email yesterday from a Democrat where we're working together to carry an initiative forward. We can't focus 100% of the time on the stuff that we know we'll disagree on. I mean, it's easy to define the disparities between people. I mean, in a very simple form, we have that in our house. My wife graduated from Purdue. I graduated from IU. In a few weeks, there will be pretty sharp dividing lines between us. But we don't dwell on that every day of the week. We dwell on our faith. We dwell on the kids that we've brought into this world and the opportunity that we create. And I think there's, I'm getting into a little bit of a tough territory here, but I think there was some concern, not maybe, but 10 years ago when we talked about millennials, the challenges they faced. There was talk of this laziness and the capacity to work, the willingness to work, some of the football coaches, some of the athletic coaches said they just don't have grit. And there were some other things. And there's great lessons to be learned through that. We've learned a lot about compassion. We've learned a lot about, making sure that opportunity and fairness is available. But what I like and what I've seen with, the way Charlie Kirk presented himself and the way this Brian Hollahand that I brought in presented themselves is they've really given this Gen Z generation a voice, saying it's all right. It's all right to speak up. It's all right to speak out. It's all right to be engaged. And I would take that a step further and say, no, we need you to speak up. We need you to speak out, and we need you to be engaged. And we need them to be engaged so their voices can be heard, so the policies can be structured to meet the opportunities and visions that they see, that they want. And, what are some definitions of that maybe we hadn't looked at ever? Remote work. That is a big deal. As I watch some of my kids striving to do that, as we watch these younger kids coming into the workforce, that's a big deal with that, and flexibility in the workplace. Something that you and I and some other friends have worked on a ton is quality of life. What's quality of life to Andy Zay might be mowing my yard and having, the house with a few acres. And that's not quite as important to your generation. They want some of that, but they want it in public space. They want a trail. They want a trail to grow. They want a trail through their community. They want Friday night affairs with some live music in the downtown. They want to see downtown buildings filled. And, I think there was not too long ago kind of a generation getting away from some of that. So I think we need Gen Z to speak up. We need them to rise up. And, there needs to be a respect of the wisdom and experience that the older folks have, which I'm kind of putting myself in that now as I'm looking at forming policies and whatever for the next generation as a senator with a lot of my colleagues, honestly, some that are much older than me, with now a generation that says, hey, we want a voice and we want to be a part of this. We want to be a part of the state. We want to be a part of this community that you're creating. And I don't, that's nice that you want to do that. We're not going to use that. So don't do that for me. Don't do that for us. Do this. And so I think it's forcing mayors, councils, schools. How are we reinventing schools to meet the demands, the challenges, the experiences, the opportunities of today? And, I think we lived in a world for a long period of time through my formative years that was very rooted in this is the way it was. This is the way it always was. And to a large degree, COVID, right? I think COVID made a dramatic pivot in that. We've challenged doctors like we never have before. We've challenged hospitals. We've challenged medical like we never have before. We're challenging education like we never have before, that we need to do it differently. We're seeing things in just different ways that, we haven't seen before. And so my reaction to that is certainly one thing, but Gen Z's reaction to that, having lived it in a different way, many of them through school, is quite different. And, more so than ever, it's great to hear the commitment to being a driving force and working and creating what they want for their future. And, the careful thing is the blend of that, because they haven't paid a lot of taxes. They haven't been engaged. They haven't been on boards. They haven't been in committees, so they're learning the ways of the world, but their voices are very valuable. And, again, I understand to some those are very polarizing figures, but I think take back some of that and just look where they've put themselves and how they've expressed themselves. And I think it's a winning formula for all of us going forward, because the great American experiment is not for me to define, to hold, to create that box and make sure everybody fits in it forward. It's more of a Play-Doh that we've got to morph and build together. And, I kind of reflect back on this because there's so much talk about technology now, particularly with AI. And I remember kind of the first operating system I got, the first computer system. And you got it in, you plug it in and start it. And the tech would say, this is only good for about 7 years because new technology will come out and this will all be obsolete. And now when we get a smartphone, we get any sort of laptop or whatever, it is obsolete the day you start it because the next version or revision is coming along. And that's just not something that I grew up with. I mean, I grab on to the old blanket, if you will, the old operating system, the old Excel spreadsheet, the old Word. And these guys are, this next generation and this Gen Z is like change. I mean, just is every day. And so, transfer that over to the business world. The way they're processing eggs up at MPS Eggs and getting them through the henhouse today, that's outdated tomorrow. And so the intent of our employers all over the place is to change constantly.
Continue to innovate.
Yeah. And it's, you can create the best processes and operating systems, but there's never any contentment anymore. And I think that's kind of the dark side of all this. And I've argued for years that, sometimes business and life, we've kind of gotten rid of the water cooler. There's no time around the water cooler to either appreciate, one, the successes you've had, or two, bring creativity to the process. You're so locked into data and information, which is critically important. I respect and understand that. But are we losing the personal contact and the human contact and, the support systems that make us also productive and successful? And, I think to a certain degree, we're starting to see some of that, which COVID dramatically compromised a lot of that. Because let's face it, social media, heck, even our podcast today is not the same as hanging out together, going for a walk in the woods, going for a walk on the trail, hanging out, having a dinner together, and really touching base. And that's why we talk a lot about mental health, the concerns, suicide, all those things that are so just kind of relevant and pertinent in society today.
As I think about everything you just shared, growing up in Indianapolis as a young person and now being here and starting my career in Wabash County, coming to Manchester University, one thing that I think have continued to fall, we all fall into the trap of living in a rural community, is thinking about the disadvantages we have, right? Less people, less money, less opportunities, know this restaurant, know that amenity. And if there's a young person out there right now, the flip side of that coin that we talk about a lot with our team at the Community Foundation and in different groups in our community is, yes, we have less of all of those things, but our opportunity, our advantage is that incremental small changes have such a larger impact, right? And engaging our young people, if a young person's sitting listening to this now, the opportunity to find that purpose, to find that impact, to experience that Play-Doh feeling of continuing to change and innovate, they have that opportunity here. And that's a luxury of being in a rural community because there's just less people, right? And so we need those young people and those young leaders that are willing to lean in and step into that and become engaged, can build a future in a rural community that otherwise may take years and decades in a larger city.
Well, the only thing I would challenge you on there a little bit is it's not less of anything. I mean, I don't know how many Starbucks you need to replace one Modocs. I mean,
That's right.
the Modocs and we have coffee shops and they're creeping up everywhere. But those are real people. Those are, and I'm not saying Starbucks isn't, but those are real business owners. Those are business owners that you see in their establishment. You see them at church. You see them at the grocery store. You see them around town, and they're involved in your community events and those kinds of things. Where sometimes those franchise things aren't, and that's where we've seen. Some of these younger kids, striving for that metro, and it's like, is it better? Is it, and they're living under the same pressures. They've got higher mortgages. They got more traffic. They're having, higher bills and different things and different things in other ways. And those are tremendous challenges. But you were right on point with the, whoa, what's my sacrifice to live in the small town? It's like, there is no sacrifice. It's really a great way to live. And there is more affordability. There is more opportunity for impact. And, you guys got a phenomenal history museum. Huntington has a phenomenal history museum. Grant County has a phenomenal history. We've got phenomenal histories of examples of where people have done great things for the world right out of these communities and will continue today. And, so the stories are rich, they're vast. And
You just have to lean into it.
yeah.
Right. Yep.
And, and I would hesitate to mention one because I know there's so much, but I reflect a lot now on my friend Ronnie Morrell, who's the mayor down in Marion. And, Marion has had maybe a little more dramatic struggles than we've had in Huntington and Wabash. They've lost some major industry over the last 20 or 30 years that has really significantly decreased their population, brought some poverty and other things in. But his mantra that he shared a few times that certainly would be applicable here in Wabash and Huntington, again, the three counties, and really rural Indiana, is Marion deserves nice things. And from his vantage point as a mayor, I know your mayor here in Wabash, Scott Long, thinks no differently. I know the people in this county think no differently. And, sometimes, I think of the mindset I had, which I've already shared, hey, get my high school degree, I'm out of here. And, I went to IU, got to taste the world, studied abroad for 6 months. And, those are memories that I treasure and experiences that unlike I'll, unlikely never have in my life. But, to come home and to have the security, to have the opportunity to do what I've done and continue to look at those opportunities moving forward, it's something you got to sink your teeth into. And, I think the opportunities of being in and from and engaged in a small community are, it's a story. It's kind of the Indiana story, right? And, I think Governor Holcomb or maybe somebody before him kind of coined the term humble Hoosier. And, that's the fact that we are a very successful state doing all kinds of dynamic and great things, feeding the world. And I don't mean that literally in a food sense, which we do a lot of that through ag, but in so many other areas. But we don't tell our story. We just put our nose down. We get to work. We support each other. We try and take care of the issues as they come up at all levels, from our state level to our local levels. And, I think that's even more prevalent in a rural community. We don't boast. And you and I have actually challenged each other with that. How do we scream a little louder? Because we have to get, fiscal support from the state and some of these granting programs and other things. We have to scream a little louder, and we have to scream 10 times more. And, the cool thing really about you that I've tried to embrace and embolden for you is I'm willing to do it. If we have to scream 10 times, I'll scream 20 times. If something makes sense in rural Indiana, it makes sense. That's usually good policy for everybody, even in bigger and metropolitan areas, and usually good for the state. And, I reflect on that in education. I reflect on that in health, which are two huge policies now. And, if we can figure it out here, why can't we, duplicate this, replicate this in a broader sense?
Yeah, because we do have that opportunity to make small changes that have a large impact that it can become scalable, right? People ask me all the time, what's the goal, right? Like what's Wabash County striving for, right? And we want to make it cool again to live in rural Indiana, right? We use that. We've talked about that at length before. We want our kids that grow up here, your grandkids, or other people that are from bigger cities to look at the opportunities that exist here, to recognize it, and for Wabash County and other rural communities like us in Indiana to be the cool thing again.
Yeah, that is such a great comment. And then to break that down, we've got, two or three things that we've kind of specifically been working on together. And one is the Rural Broadband Initiative, which is supposed to explode here in likely 30 days. So we'll know the commitments of that and be able to get everybody connected at a high-speed internet because, again, like I sometimes jokingly say, I think for your generation, that's more important than wastewater and water to homes and to communities, is the kids want to make sure they're connected. Probably be connected and where they can get their coffee. Those are the two big things. So, but that will level the playing field because if you can go to LaGrow, if you can go to Rowan, if you can go to Andrews, Roanoke, Warren, again, throughout Grant County and have that high-speed internet in today's world, you can kind of work for anybody, anywhere. You can be working for the biggest, Fortune 500 firms or Silicon Valley firms or creating your own business or supporting local communities or supporting industry within our state. But the key is to make sure you have that connectivity. So you get that, you get some cool quality of life with creativity through, community programs, you get stable parks, you get walking trails, you get a little water activity, the kayaking, those kinds of things. You dump a couple tons of candy in the street and let the kids go crazy. I mean, those are just things that you do. You buy a trolley and fill it up 6 times a year and offer it for rent other times a year. I mean, only something as crazy as Christine Flora can dream up. But those are real things. And it's a wholesome thing. It's a real thing of building family, supported by faith and opportunity. And, you can't do it by yourself. And sometimes it's a challenge to even do it together. But again, even if you're reaching out for funds or ideas, sometimes it's also internal that folks need to hear that multiple times before they can say, yeah, this isn't too bad a life.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Before we get into some of the policy that you've worked on and both successes and failures that you'd say, as well as some of the political things that people may be reading about right now, I want to start with you as a state senator and what I've always appreciated. Was fortunate to do a little bit of work down in the State House, both as an intern in college and a little bit after that before I started at the Community Foundation. And to meet other legislators, the one thing that I've always appreciated and been grateful that you're our state senator here is your work with constituent service and constituent relations and how that work drives your public policy. I've personally experienced it with some of the things we've worked on. I've gotten to watch you handle things that our residents here in Wabash County go through. Talk a little bit about what the constituent service work is like as a state senator and how some of the proud moments you've had in that work that may lead us into the policy discussion, but also some of the more challenging things that you may have faced in that work.
No, I appreciate that because that's certainly something that I prided myself on and want to be the best at regardless. I mean, there's 50 senators. I want to be the best senator at that. And that's, making sure that I serve, listen to, and respond to the people. And, in full transparency, it may not be the answer you want. It may not be in the exact time. And, it may not work out perfectly. But the biggest and most important thing I can do is make sure that my people feel heard. And that's everybody I represent. And honestly, I've done a pretty good job at it. So I'm answering questions and I'm helping folks from all over the state, not just within my district, because they found me to be that responsive. And this person will tell that person which gets out of my district. And I really, at that point, I don't care where they're calling from or what they're doing. If there's an issue or need a question answered, I will do everything in my power to hear that out. Now, it's certainly been no more prevalent than it is today with Governor Braun and his successes as a businessman. And you hear it time and time again. Let's just run the government like a business. I'll be maybe the first or only to tell you, you're not going to run government like a business. In your best effort, you're not going to run government like a business. They're two different worlds. The transparency of governance needs to be there. And a lot of times you will not have that in a business world. Those are made in boardrooms. Those are made by executives, and then they are rolled out. So they're two dynamically different worlds. Now, having said that, there are certainly principles within government in trying to make government more efficient, more effective, and more responsive that parallel very well in government. And one thing that I've embraced from day one, which I've always embraced as a part of my business, is I can't have people call my business. I can't have people stop at my business and forget about them. And so my policy within the Senate from day one has been, if you contact my office by email, by mail, or by phone, that you will hear back from my office within 48 hours. And so I have a 2-day policy. I train every one of my LAs, every one of my interns on that. And I myself try and hold myself to that. And I don't have a 100% batting record, let's be clear. But I try and respond to folks. Many cases, it's creating casework where we need to contact an agency and to get a better answer, to get a specific answer, question answered. But first and foremost, I just want people to understand that I will do everything in my power to do that. Now, having said that, I have about 6 different emails, so keeping track of all those is sometimes difficult, and some do fall between the cracks. But, I've instructed my staff, because they check a few of them. I have my primary one, and I check that constantly throughout the day. And again, reach back out and try and solve. But you go back to COVID, what does constituent service look like? I had a mother who had a daughter with some form of cancer that was going to Riley. And she was a young girl, 13, 14, 15. There were some processes.
The child was 13, 14,
Yeah.
15. Got it.
And so clearly the mother was at her side through that process.
Right.
She had actually graduated, if you will, because she was over 18, but they were still continuing some procedures to try and help her with her health, and was really in a life or death situation. And with the COVID policies, they would not let her mom be with her child. So I had to go to the top of the food chain, if you will, with Riley/IU Health to get that mom to be with her daughter at, of course, which was one of the most traumatic times of their life. And if something would have happened and the mother wouldn't have been there, I mean, it was a very easy thing for me to jump into that with both feet, having the capacity to relate to that mother as a father of 5 children. If that was one of my kids, and that was actually what I challenged IU Health with. If that was one of my kids, I would demand on being there, because I was not going to be there if that was the last breath of my child. And I don't care if she was 16 or 20, if the continuum of care was there for the reasons, and mom was willing to do anything through any protocol, whatever, that needed to change. Similarly, I had a patient, a truck driver down the road in Marion, who had some health issues, was in the hospital, and was not able to have visitation because of COVID, the concerns of how that, the disease and all that would spread, and had basically given up the will to live, and just wanted to hold his wife's hand, see his daughter's face, and be with him. And we powered through that, got them together, and he's actually back driving a truck and living life today. I'm no doctor, never did well in science, never really cared to go down that area, but I know what's right and what's wrong. And I know as a father, and I know as a family, in a time of need, in a time of very serious health, I want my wife, I want my family to be able to have access to me. And let's be real, it may be to say goodbye. It may be to say I can do it and, fight back on that health, which, sometimes you don't feel like you can do, but, there's stories throughout life that, we've heard where people, power through the willingness of fighting off the Grim Reaper. But to be able to help people be alive and be back living healthy lives, that was a big deal. And then just most recently, it was really a land issue where DNR had declared part of some acreage a floodplain. And the folks had been up and down through all the legalese of local zoning, state zoning, floodplains. And I went out and did a personal visit on the property, and you just kind of shook your head like, this makes no sense, where they did a reassessment of the flood territory and gave them permission to build their outlet in their barn. And it took me engaging, knowing the right people, and helping direct that through the agency, and letting them know that I did a site visit, that I expected them to do a site visit to make this at least make sense. Again, I couldn't promise an outcome there, but I wanted the agency to put reflective eyes on that, realizing that what we're saying to these people doesn't really make sense if you go and walk the property. And I needed you to do that. And they got a clearance on a revision of the plight of the property in the floodplain. And now they're able to build their barn and do that kind of thing. And it's, simple stuff like that. I mean, kind of simple, but it takes a grit, it takes a drive, it takes that's a little bit of a small businessman's fight. I'm not going to fail. I got to do this. We got to do that. And, people appreciate that. And it's easy when, big father government comes speaking and says, that we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that, to just fold and say, okay, I guess we can't do it. And, if, again, I understand right from wrong, and particularly when it comes into the role of government. And, if there's something that clear in the 3 examples that I just mentioned, I'm going to double down and fight twice on Sunday to make sure that I, as a representative of the government, does the right thing for the people that I represent.
No, I appreciate you sharing those examples, both in life or death, true life or death situations, you going to bat and using relationships to do so, or public policy issues
Right.
for a single person on their property, right? I just appreciate that's a good snapshot into what that constituent service looks like. Let's roll to the policy side.
Yeah.
What are some of the policy issues you've worked on the last couple sessions or right now that you're really, really excited about? And then we'll move into maybe more broadly some of the issues that Indiana's facing.
Well, I mean, there's a lot, and I'm the kind of guy, like I said earlier, I say yes to everything. So it's kind of funny when I reflect on my policy career, man, I have my finger in about every committee. We have like 12 or 13 standing committees, and it's like there's very few that I haven't presented a piece of policy in. So, some say it's important to, kind of become an expert in one area, and your colleagues will turn to you for that. But for me, it's been a little bit more of a shotgun approach where I know a little about a lot. And, I think that to some degree that's made me a pretty well-rounded legislator. And, I think that's allowed me to dive into some areas. And historically, I go back to one piece just because I think it blends the best of who I am. And, as I talked a little bit about business and government and how they kind of intersect, and, there, I don't think would be a perfect world where you could run government as a business. There's just some things that don't work that way. But there are certainly some characteristics and some personalities of either a business person or business concepts that do play very well in government. And I think that same way with the faith world and church world. And, one thing when I came in that was 2 things, really. I mean, one was the opioid crisis, but the other was really kind of a crisis that was present then, and is really an ongoing crisis in Indiana, and that's DCS, foster care, and the fact that the state becomes wards of these children, which there was a horrible incident right here in Wabash a few years back. But I, along with my former colleague, Senator John Crane, got wind of this concept called the Care Portal, and it's just kind of an ideal blending of the faith community and government policy work. Because we wouldn't want an independent arbiter, a not-for-profit, shall I say, out determining whether a child should remain in a certain situation with a mother or father, mother and father. Is there abuse or neglect? I mean, that needs to kind of be an official policy of government. So we need that to happen. But in Indiana, 80% of our removals of children from their family setting is neglect. And a lot of that crosses over with poverty. It crosses over with them not having certain things. So a housing setup, apartment or whatever is not fit for that child to be in that setting. And so what the Care Portal does, which we have, Josiah White's is the host for it here in Wabash County, they enroll churches throughout the community to provide material services to some of these situations and families to ideally keep the mother and father and children together. And that link is kind of it's that triangle concept of DCS, a host agency, which is Josiah White's, and then the faith community. So if a caseworker or potentially the police step into a situation where they look at an unfit living situation, maybe kids are sleeping on the floor, etc., they can put through technological means an email blast out to all the churches that are registered with the host portal. Hey, we need 2 twin beds for girls that are sleeping on the floor of this situation. And then the DCS case manager can coordinate this XYZ church over here will agree to, provide the material, the beds for that setting. So they'll coordinate a meeting point with the caseworker to bring in those beds, give them appropriate living opportunity there with the beds, potentially provide a little bit of a mentoring situation between the ministry of that church and that person, and keep that family together. Because I believe that the family is the support system that's going to provide that. And if we would have to remove that children, don't think those kids still wouldn't want their mother, still wouldn't want their father, still wouldn't want to be with their family. They would. And obviously we have many great foster families throughout our country, throughout our state, that are trying to be those intermediaries to foster those relationships. But if it's a material need like that, we can keep them together. It's phenomenal. And then from an accountability standpoint, it is a program that they put in the value of that material service they provide and how many kids they've served. And so I can pull it up on my phone right now, and we'll know the multi-million-dollar impact that the Care Portal's had in the state of Indiana in about, I think, 12 or 13 counties right now, and exactly how many children they've served. And taking that reflection to another point, and what Senator Crane and I, former Senator Crane and I, talked about a lot, if the faith community were completely engaged in this arena and this of, child services, foster care, I looked at Huntington at the time, and when I came in, I think there were about 100 foster children in Huntington County. But guess what? We had about 100 churches. So if every church adopted a family, could we really, and I get this is an ideal situation, but could you eliminate that agency where you really had the care and compassion of the faith world taking care of the families and needs within the communities, in this case being the counties? What would that look like? And of course, this we build out through Family and Child Services, DCS. And, I think if we can fully get this built out, it's something that would serve not just that, but elderly in poverty, any family going through trauma or a difficult situation, where you could use the Care Portal to provide these temporary services to keep families, to keep individuals intact in their homes, apartments, and living a good life. So that's a long spiel on, I guess, what was the most important policy. And, collectively, you and I have worked together to do exactly what you say, and that is to bring attention to rural Indiana, to make sure we have the opportunities to capitalize on READY funds, to capitalize on OKRA funds, to capitalize on community crossings, transportation funds. I know your mayor has a big project he's worked on for a long time with the railroad crossing for public safety. Structuring those things, creating those things to make sure that, our communities can be the best they can be. Those are powerful things. And I spend a lot of time on broadband from the realization that, that connectivity is just critically important for the rural areas that I represent and the rural counties in our state that are kind of stagnant or declining, because we need to get all the boats rising together, if you will. And, if our metro counties are increasing by 1 or 2 or 5%, we need to make sure we're doing the same in our rural counties. And a part of that is making sure that they are, good places to live. And those quality of life initiatives are increasing and growing and meeting the needs of certainly the next generation and the current generation.
I can tell our listeners right now, for Wabash County specific policy, right, or constituent service, we recently worked with a state agency in our Imagine Early program at the Community Foundation, right? Yes. That it was all of these years and years of challenges with things, right? And you were able to work with us to number one, deeply understand the issue, engage the state agency, resolve the problem. Or if it's a legislative policy, we call it the Kerry Mugford bill now. But a couple of years ago, remember we were building, you talk about quality of life, the Riverfront Pavilion project in North Manchester, large project, great for the community. Well, continue to be utilized more and more in North Manchester. And we ran into an issue of the ability to procure materials during COVID and how public municipalities couldn't put any money down to secure a spot in the line because the code wouldn't allow them to do so. And Kerry Mugford is set to be the next chair of the board for AIM, the Association of Cities and Towns, and is a well-recognized clerk treasurer that knew the rule inside and out. And we were able to work with you. She worked with you, came down and testified just of the importance of, in the climate of backlog of materials, and to allow local municipalities to continue to get these quality of life, these large projects of any scale, infrastructure, parks, whatever it may have been, accomplished. This rule was in the way, right? And so you author a bill and work with Kerry, and you get the policy changed right out of North Manchester, Indiana.
Oh, absolutely. And now Journey's on their last tour, and they'll be coming up there to the Riverside, and I can't wait. And I feel a little ashamed we've gotten this far in the podcast and have now kind of gotten to bringing up Patty Grant, the superstar of certainly the early childhood learning. And just conceptually, the dream and the vision of that is something we all should aspire to, because it touches on all the right things at so many levels. Certainly with engaging children and families early in the education process. Second of all, to create opportunity through the process, both with the families and the students, as well as community engagement. And finally, to address the overall concern of the cost of higher education and what's next after high school. And what a well thought out, intuitive, and certainly the accountability measure of the partnership they have with University of Michigan, right? And that accountability piece. There's nothing in that concept that's not untouched and well thought out. And yeah, there was a piece there within the state that became somewhat problematic. And there was a little ideology push between her and I, and you and I, and that, and how to bring all that together. And it's such a long-term process that things have changed. The people that she's worked with over time have changed within government, and that has created some problems. But the vision is certainly worth every day and every hour of investment and every dollar of investment. And, I know you are anxious now taking up that mantle, and I am anxious as I get old and retire and look at what that can or what it will look like in another 10 years, and how many Wabash citizens and, can we keep home and do. And I, to a certain degree, I've taken that beyond the county lines of Wabash and shared not just that plan, but holistically, what our institutions of higher ed are doing to keep our kids home.
Absolutely. I mean, there is no greater example as we talk about investing in our future, right? Or population decline, right? No better opportunity for us than to invest in our young people that are growing up here, to keep them here, and so that they move back to a community that they remember growing up in and that invested in them, right? And that's been with the Imagine Early program, and you've been instrumental in helping.
I represent 10 school corporations in my 3 counties, 2,500 graduates every year. And there's no reason we can't at least show them a pipeline of birth to career and birth to death right here in the 3 counties that I represent. And, we got to be real. We're not going to capture 100%, but we should strive to make sure that they at least know the opportunities that are available, within the parameters of their county, and education and workforce opportunity and really everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Shifting gears a little bit.
Yes.
To the political scene, maybe, and how that's bleeding from the national level into Indiana on some key issues. Right now, President Trump, and there's a large push of redistricting, right? Redrawing the maps and the lines. Maybe not specific to that issue, but just talking right now about the political scene nationally, how polarizing it's been. How is that from the federal level bled down into the state of Indiana on some key issues?
But let's be a little fair. I mean, yes, it's polarizing, but you know what sells? Polarization.
That's right.
And, whether it's Fox News, whether it's MSNBC, whether it's podcasts, whether it's, pick your favorite news source or social media source. And of course, everybody's a reporter these days, right? Because all you need is a Facebook account or a Twitter account or X account, whatever we call it now, or Instagram, and you can know everything about everything and put it out there, whether it's true or not. And it's the sensationalism of all that sells. But I would argue, even within the halls of Congress, there's a lot of agreement on maybe backgrounds, maybe faith backgrounds. I think there's a lot of those folks that probably pray together. I think there's a fair amount of agreement on some policies. And yeah, it comes down to, some difficult times, which they're coming out of this government shutdown that was certainly disruptive and was going to be very, very problematic if it continued any longer with SNAP benefits and other benefits. But, when you run a family budget, when you run a federal budget, when you run a state budget, an organization budget, and you're talking about being $38 trillion in debt, there's going to be a lot of disagreement in how you're going to eventually pull that back, repeal it, or face the facts in that. And even SNAP benefits, when you look at that, there was a period through COVID where nobody could be denied those benefits. And so in every state, which we're facing here, even in Indiana, we saw the roles of our entitlement programs explode. And we spent, I need to get this data pinned down, but we spent like decades, 30, 40 years accumulating so much of a benefit and entitlement that we have now doubled within 5 years. So that just screams to the explosion of some of these entitlement programs. And what some investigation and audit is showing us is that almost 40% of the folks on those rolls are young, able-bodied adults. And so there's people taking advantage of those roles that shouldn't be on there. But once you giveth, it is very difficult to pull back. And so that's the strife that I think the current administration in DC is fighting. That's certainly what we're working on here through the state of Indiana. So there is a tremendous challenge, as there would be between, family, household, or anything. And to think that we're going to honestly reflect on a $38 trillion deficit and pull back on that there won't be any local impact is just, it's wrongheaded. It's going to affect all of us if we're ever going to get serious about beginning to balance a budget. And I think the Republicans are trying to get there. I think that was the opportunity they took on with DOGE. I think that's the opportunity they've tried to work through recently with a basic continuing resolution, which is not a good budget process. But Mike Johnson acknowledges that, the Speaker of the House. But it's a tool they needed to use now to begin to tackle the bigger issue, and that's what they're also pivoting on now that the Democrats brought to a head, and there's going to be an explosion in the Affordable Care Act rates and in those opportunities. And, we can't just say we're going to throw money at it because it's going to add to the deficit. It's going to add to these challenges, and we need to get to serious reforms. And so you can't digress and say there's not, disconnect and there's not some problems with civility. But I think to a large degree there is, and there certainly is in Indiana. Do we disagree on issues all the time? But can we handle that in, grown up and in reasonable fashion? So now let's pivot to redistricting. Redistricting is the hotbed topic of the day. It's nothing we envisioned coming out of the session last April. We thought we had done a pretty good job, and we're actually accused as Republicans of gerrymandering wildly in Indiana. And now somehow those maps seem to be very good. So it's kind of interesting, the perspective there. But, there are two things we do as being a senator. You do some political work and you do some policy work. And obviously every year we get together to look through policy and do that. And certainly politics creeps into that. And then we do policy that sometimes creeps into political work. This is obviously a very political analysis and a very political calculation that we're being asked to do here in Indiana. Why wouldn't you do it? You wouldn't do it because we've never done it before. I mean, typically you have a census, and that census drives then redistricting to what typically is the majority party, and they draw the lines for the state of Indiana. And the federal impact is obviously congressional seats, because the senators don't matter because they both represent the entire state. And then you have our seats at the state Senate level, House, and then it gets even down into local level, school board districts, city council, county council districts. So, yeah, historically and traditionally, that's the way it's done. Why are we being asked to do this? We're being asked to do this to be federal partners with the administration. And I don't think it's wrongheaded. I know a lot of people disagree with me. A lot have said that. But I also argue that I don't think the case has been made either. And I've been in contact with the White House nearly every day for the last 3 to 4 weeks. I'm talking with President Trump, J.D. Vance on a regular basis, a lot of their staffers, and they're trying to use a very strong persuasive tactic with myself and many of our members in the Senate, which is kind of where the loggerhead is on all this. And I respect what they're trying to do and what they're trying to do, but I disagree wholeheartedly with how they're trying to do it, because I don't think we've ever made, we being the state Senate, the House of Representatives, the governor, the state Republican Party, have made the case to the people. And the case to the people, I believe, is simply this. There has been some discussion about the maps of California, which are wild. They're crazy. There's been a lot of discussion about the maps of Illinois, which there's one, I think, that goes from state line to state line. It's almost like a broken pencil going across the state. And then I would add to that the congressional districts of the 2000s in Indiana, where Huntington County was actually in the northern district of Congressman Dan Burton that went all the way down to Carmel, around the east side of Indianapolis to Shelbyville. The district probably was no wider than 20 miles across, but about 150 miles long. And so those were drawn by Democrats right here in Indiana. So if you think that they are innocent, they being Democrats, no, they are not. And are Republicans perfect? No, they are not. And I think that's the little bit of balancing of power. And I think oddly enough, I use that word, but the Trump card for me was the census was done during the Trump administration when he was last in. And the Democrats sued the Census Bureau to push the final decisions of the census into the Biden administration to doctor and manipulate those numbers in their favor. And that's where you have millions of illegal immigrants being counted in the state of California that would not otherwise have been counted, that gives them representation of nobody knows exactly, 5 to 10 more congressional representatives that they wouldn't otherwise have. You have states like Maryland, Massachusetts, that pretty consistently vote Republican 30 to 40% of the time, that have never had a Republican congressman for years because the districts are gerrymandered fully in favor of Democrats. So it is a very political problem. So the current administration's challenge is, let's work with the states where we have some majorities, where we know there's a strong Republican presence, to counteract some of that. And what's at stake? I think, honestly, what's at stake is the favorability of administration that's been very supportive of a lot of things we've done in Indiana. They are very supportive of a lot of the policies that we've adopted in Indiana, that they're making, that have been made a part of the big, beautiful bill. They are very supportive of what we bring to the table. Senator Jim Banks just hosted a defense summit in Northeast Indiana. You're thinking about L3 Harris. You're looking at BAE. You're looking at Raytheon. You're looking at having the second largest naval base, oddly enough, right here in Indiana, down at Crane Naval Base. You're looking at the assets of Grissom Air Force Base right next door here in Miami County. You're looking at the 122nd Fighter Wing, Muscatatuck, the fighter base over in Terre Haute. We have real assets. We have real benefits that the federal administration recognizes here in Indiana. And so to keep peace with the administration, to work with the administration, it's critical that I think we do our part. And so I think to that, we need to fully vet this out. We need to present this publicly to the citizenry to understand that. And, I think, that's just, it's a time we're in. Some argue it opens up a can of worms. Democrats come in control. We're going to do it all over again. California obviously just passed Prop 50, and they're going to do that. But, I, for one, and I know everybody didn't agree with me in this, I'll be, 100% transparent there. But what I have seen recently, going back a year and a few more beyond that, I don't like. Love or hate Donald Trump, is he what we wanted or what we needed for a time as this? And I know a lot of people would, again, disagree, and I respect that. But he will do a press conference for an hour and a half and mumble through and say stupid things. But you are hearing from the commander-in-chief and president of the United States nearly every single day, with unfettered time, as much time as you want, any question that can be asked. And you're going to get his opinion. You're going to get, his policies, which some have worked and are working better than others. But you're speaking to the person. We don't know the last administration, who we were talking to, who was making decisions, who was signing things, and what was going on. That is two different worlds. And I don't want to go back there. I want to know that we have a leader of our country, we have a leader of our state that is fully available and accessible to the media, to the public, and doing the best they can to communicate that on ideas and initiatives that they're bringing forward. There's been no president in the history of the United States that has been sued more civilly and criminally than the current president sitting in the White House. And the opposition in this case is using every means available to them to disrupt, to discredit, to turn this administration upside down. And again, you can disagree, you can hate that, but there are some things that are absolutely unprecedented that have happened just within the 10 months and certainly over his 8 to 10 years in politics. And remember, this is a person that is a wildly successful businessman, not perfect, but wildly successful, that is not taking $1 to serve as our president. And I just think in a time such as this, we need to really state the case to the people, the why. And that's where I think the administration has come up short in this case, where they're trying to use the power of our supermajority and bully it through. And I think politically that will cost us more money and more effort on the backside to get people reelected. And I think if we make the case, I think the people will understand better the why and will be more supportive of our state, at least having a strong debate on this and bringing something forward. It's untraditional, it's unconventional, but I think we're also in untraditional and unconventional times.
Absolutely.
And this is one issue. I mean, pick any issue, and we can draw up a scenario that we're talking about things that, have never been discussed in the history of the United States.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
As we round third here and are wrapping up, I have 2 questions remaining.
Okay.
One serious, one less serious. Which one would you like to take first?
Oh, let's get serious out of the way and end
Serious
on
out of the way.
Laughing, happy note.
Of all of your time in public service in this area, what are you most proud of in your time?
Probably the constituent service, which we've covered pretty well. I think something I want to reflect on that people maybe don't understand or wouldn't understand. The challenges of being a state senator, to some degree, I don't think Andy Zay is ever respected and understood. And what I mean by that is I've had my own wife tell me, you're a state senator, 1, make sure you act like it, and 2, you have to understand that people look at you a little differently. Because I've never kind of wore that hat or tried on that shoes. I've always felt the people at the convenience store or the supermarket or in my church are the same old people and the same people I'm just with and represent. And I mean, you've caught me on that a few times. I just kind of function with my hair down, so to speak, and operate. And, there's a certain thing that, I never understood, that it is always a big deal. And having said that, there is a very dark side to holding the seat that I don't talk about, I don't share about a lot, but people need to understand that I have called the sheriff multiple times because my wife has been threatened, my children have been threatened at their school, I've been threatened with my life multiple times, and just the names, the attitude. There's been a few policy situations where we've been in Indianapolis and have walked out of the building under a tunnel of state police officers. We've had drones flying all around the building for our protection. And again, I dismiss that a little bit just because I'm just Andy from Huntington. And it's like, I don't know quite what I'm saying, but it's kind of sad that we have to walk through this world of safety and security, because all that I've shared and all that I've said, I'm going to talk to you whether I agree with you or not. You're going to hear from me. I know we're going to disagree on policy. I disagree with a lot of good Republicans on policy and have voted against and spoken against some of it. And I'm going to do my best. And I have typically very good reasons for why I'm voting and what I'm doing. And I just would like a little respect and dignity for doing that. And there's people that don't, and they take that disagreement to the nth degree. And in today's world, it's a little unearthing to think that that's the reality we live in. And that may get back to, I guess, your question from before, but it's just so humbling and honoring to be a state senator and to, have had access to some of the people and opportunities I've had, really as a learning experience, spending some time with the folks at Grissom, who are just remarkable people in what they do, and to learn what they are really doing, to having been in and through a nuclear power plant, a coal power plant, a gas power plant, and, fight through some of the issues with wind and solar and carbon capture, which have all been very present right here in the district, and to work with mayors and North Manchester and just all those folks. And, it's at the end of the day, it's just good people trying to do good things. And, I may differ, and sometimes, I have to offer a little dose of reality because they're not maybe seeing like a statewide picture or a global picture of what the issue is, but trying to respect them and trying to educate them and trying to be educated myself on different issues. But it's just, I'm just immensely proud to represent the people and represent the state like I do. And, a call from Donald Trump and 2 meetings with J.D. Vance. Are you kidding me? That's kind of a big deal. And, he's in a lot of respects not much different than I. And I mean, I made the run for Congress. That's fine. But, I love my life, and I'm as content sitting at a football game as I am talking with the Vice President of the United States. And to that degree, I tell them that. And, I want to make sure that they understand that they're representing Wabash, Indiana, Huntington, Indiana, and Marion, Indiana. And, that's what I'm most concerned about is Main Street. I'm not really concerned about Wall Street. And I know they will cross paths at some point, but there's an awful lot of people and very good people that live in the communities I represent. And for that, I will always carry that voice forward.
No, we appreciate that. The less serious question, you have been an advocate, a champion, a fighter for Wabash County and rural Indiana, as has been explained throughout this episode. If you have one night, one evening in Wabash County, what are you going to do?
That's not even a fair question. You know where it is.
I don't know if I do.
We'll see you at the Speakeasy tonight.
The 950 Speakeasy in LaGrow. Okay. Very good. Good answer.
That's my getaway. And obviously downtown, I've been to some shows at the Eagles, and they were gracious to host me last week. And, for the event I hosted there, and then just the immense work that Todd and the team do to bring talent through the Honeywell Center. And, and I just can't say enough good about Christine and her work at the Visitors Bureau, unlike any other Visitors Bureau I've ever seen. And really before you, Patty's work at the foundation, I just continue to be marveled by what the foundation in Wabash County looks like comparatively to certainly the neighbors, but really throughout the state. And, those things don't happen by accident. And you guys have shown me through and through the hows and whys of that. And, I just continue to be impressed. And, it's helped motivate me, because when I hear excuses in Huntington, when I hear excuses in Grant County, when I hear excuses in rural counties anywhere, I'm like, I got a county that's killing it. What are you doing? And why aren't you doing it? But again, it's capturing that talent. How do we capture them? How do we introduce them to rural Indiana, or how do we keep them there if they come to our universities or into our space for work or otherwise? And, I think there's great opportunity there. But no, I just really, really enjoy, the accessibility of getting around, and it's convenient, it's comfortable. You can be as remote as a walk through the reservoir grounds or the state forest, or you can be as busy as being in downtown for a festival, which through the summer, there's one about every given night of the week through the many towns I represent. If you need more, Indy's not that far away for a Colts game, or certainly the 500 or a bigger event. And if you need big city life, Chicago, Detroit, and even our access with airlines will get you anywhere you want to go. So it's just a great, 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 great life. And, for me to be, positive when appropriate and critical when appropriate, and try and do that constructively is, just the greatest opportunity of my lifetime. And I think, I mentioned a few, but, I don't have to go too far in Huntington County with Roanoke and downtown Huntington and the offerings that are there as well. And certainly admire the work of so many of my mayors with, their efforts down in Grant County and through Wabash and Huntington. It's just been awesome.
Senator Andy Zay, thank you very much for joining the Thrive in Wabash County podcast. Have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, but also the opportunity for others that may have listened or that are listening to this podcast to get just a little bit of snapshot into something that I appreciate about you and your service to our community and to the state of Indiana. I want to thank our generous sponsors that make this podcast possible: the Lisa Gilman Investment Fund, the Sandra Kunkel Trust, Mark and Amy Ford, Paperworks Industries, the City of Wabash, the Community Foundation of Wabash County, and Visit Wabash County. I'm your co-host, Alex Downard, and until next time, keep on thriving, Wabash County.
Let's go.